This is NatSec Matters.
I'm host Michael Allen with Beacon Global Strategies. Today I'm joined by Dr. Kirill Shamiev, a non-resident fellow at the newly relaunched Kennan Institute and a policy fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations, where his research centers on Russian civil-military relations and domestic politics. Mr. Shamiev joins us today for a discussion on his recent article in Foreign Policy, The Battle Inside Russia's Elite, where he sheds light on the internal dynamics of the Kremlin and their influence on the war in Ukraine. Stay with us as we speak with Kirill Shamiev. Kirill Shamiev, welcome to NatSec Matters.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Kirill, I noticed a great article that you wrote entitled The Battle Inside Russia's Elite, and I thought you'd be the perfect guest to discuss these regime dynamics as the Ukraine war drags on and as the Russian elite seem to be enjoying or not enjoying the same kind of economic spoils that they usually do. I'd love for you to comment a little bit on your recent travels and contacts across Russia and tell us what is the mood among the oligarchs and other regime insiders.
Yeah, this is a great question, though. During my last trip to Moscow and St. Petersburg back in May this year, I tried to talk to whoever is in touch with the Russian government, with the Russian business elites, and discuss the potential end of the war against Ukraine. And I would say the general mood is what I call the pragmatic fatalism, meaning that people who are inside the country, who cannot leave the country or do not want to leave the country, they try to achieve what they can in terms of their personal goals, their company organizational goals in existing environment, when there is only one person who actually decides on the war itself, on such a horrible and tremendous event that, of course, shakes the whole country. So those who could leave, they did leave. There's always been, almost more than 3 years. But those who remain, they just try to achieve what they can in this quite hostile environment. It's impossible to criticize the president and his decision, his policies. It's simply speaking illegal, as well as criticizing, for example, the military's decisions in Ukraine. So adaptation is the only course of action for these people. They don't expect anything good, but at the same time, of course, they try to survive and achieve what they can, again, in this pretty unpleasant environment.
So is it common among the Russian elite that the war is going badly? I get that they feel like they have no control over it, but is it sort of a uniform view that the war is going quite badly?
I would definitely say that everyone understands the significant human and financial toll on the country. Everyone knows about human losses, hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers killed and wounded, enormous financial losses, as well as just lost opportunities due to the sanctions and the basically destruction of Russia's relationships with the West. But at the same time, there is a proportion, there's some part of the elites who actually think that Russia is capable of, by doing what it is doing in Ukraine, to basically wait out and achieve the Ukrainian collapse in this war of attrition, because Russia has more, nominally speaking, right, it has more human resources, more financial resources, and significance, for example, weapons production. So they're looking at this as they cannot lose this war. That's why the only solution is this very horrible and unpleasant attritional war, and Russia has an upper hand in their view in this warfare.
Explain for our listeners, I mean, we've heard about Russian oligarchs for years, but unpack that for us. Talk a little bit about the regime elite around Putin, how he maintains power, and explain their significance in the system.
Well, currently the Russian political regime is extremely personalized, especially when it comes to foreign policy and the war. Again, as I said, all the things come from President Putin. But at the same time, domestically, he acts as the final arbiter of the competition and arguments and sometimes conflicts between different elite factions. And by doing so, he actually strengthens his rule. Why? Because these people compete. Sometimes they can be just normal, competition, say business competition. Then it becomes abnormal. Then they use state resources, state powers to achieve their business goals. And if this conflict escalates, Putin can be the one who decides on who is right and who is not. And so people look at him as a sort of the chief decision maker who everyone must listen to. At the same time, what I've witnessed, especially during this war, I would even call it like a startup approach in the Russian public administration and actually even war fighting. It seems like the Kremlin generally is capable of delegating some of decision making to lower level commanders when it comes to the military or public administration officials. If they sort of sell this idea to him that, for example, say, let's take an example of the Rubicon drone center, this half-secretive drone center, which basically is completely outside the existing structure of the military command, but it innovates. It's in touch with the drone producers, with the warfighters in the field, and it's apparently, according to even the Ukrainian sources, is highly effective on the battlefield. Formally, it shouldn't be working like this. It's completely outside, again, the legal and command and control structures of the Russian army, but someone sold this idea to the Russian leadership and they're implementing. Or on the other side, we remember the case of Prigozhin and his mutiny attempt. I think that's the example from the other side of the spectrum when this delegation failed and probably almost could have changed the Russian regime if he probably pushed, if Prigozhin pushed to go to Moscow.
On.
Yeah.
What is just speaking of the Prigozhin mutiny, it's been a long time now, over a year, but have we learned any more about what his motivation was? Did he always intend to go all the way to Moscow and was talked out of it, or what exactly was he after?
I think what we know so far, of course, we cannot ask him anymore because he's dead, but what we would know that on the one hand, he is really in a significant argument and conflict with the Ministry of Defense. He tried to achieve the goals Putin told him in Ukraine to occupy Bakhmut and to keep pushing forward. At the same time, for that, he achieved a significant delegation of resources, both financial armaments and human resources, including even inmates from Russian prisons. But then the Ministry of Defense started to, even theoretically speaking, as a normal government body, to try to control this semi-private, semi-public, unclear private military force. He was completely against it publicly because Russia's Ministry of Defense back then was allegedly way less efficient than his private military company. But on the other side, it of course meant that he would have lost his power, his influence in the system. Another motivation I've heard of from investigative reporters is just personal, psychological, because he's seen hundreds probably of bodies, dismembered bodies. He's seen the destruction and almost two years in this war can take a toll on everyone who is engaged in it. So all of this combination of political, administrative, and probably some psychological factors played out in the mutiny. And what's surprising to me, and I would like to perhaps know one day why he stopped. This is unclear, because he could have kept going, but he stopped and decided not to enter Moscow.
Amazing. It's still just incredible to think that even happened. All right, so Putin's the final arbiter among the elite factions, but is there any sense that his control is weakening?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. It's $1 million question. In general, the Russian system has surprised, I think, international and even domestic observers in terms of its resilience and ability to sustain the war. At the same time, what I see now is the lack of Russia's economic growth that slowly diminishes Russia's budget, that creates additional political and administrative challenges. Basically, for example, regions are unable to fulfill their official duties, say, in housing maintenance or providing some other public goods. And this creates extra conflicts and pressure. So when we talk about Putin's grip on power, I think we should really focus on his tools and resources. In general, now there is a lot of concern about the future in terms of economic development. There is no recipe for economic growth. The military spending is significant. It's like 30% of the Russian annual budget.
Wow.
Ukrainian strikes on oil and gas infrastructure also starting to bite, and this increases this anxiety and question. So what's going to happen next?
A lot going on there. So let me just ask you this. If there's no real dissent, what is behind the frequent suspicious deaths of businessmen, apparent oligarchs, and the rest? I think you wrote in your article that there have been as many as at least 28 mysterious deaths, and it feels like they're always falling out of windows. That is what cover stories are. 27 senior business executives have died under unclear circumstances since 2022. Talk a little bit about that. What is going on?
Yeah, this whole story of Russia's CEO suspiciously dying is in the minds of everyone who is in Moscow, and they're occupying more or less significant positions in the Russia's power vertical. Apart from this, there are more than hundreds of arrests of senior defense officials and business people. So there is a lead purge going on now. In my view, this is part of the regime's struggle, on the one hand, to reduce the risk of any transition towards the ceasefire or any peace agreement. On the other, we should always think that there are mid-level managers who try to lobby or use state resources, state powers to achieve their own, to defeat their opponents. So, for example, there is official track of repressions against some elites who are suspected of ties to the West. Their assets are being nationalized and redistributed to other members of the elites. But at the same time, imagine you are a general within the Russia's prosecutor's office, and you're a bit corrupt, and you have some connections to other members of, say, industrial elites. And then there is an opportunity to use your power to undermine the enemies of your friends in the industrial elites. So this is how this is sort of there is a top-down policy, but also a bit of a bottom-up use of state resources by other members of the elites. And it means that, it creates this feeling of insecurity and anxiety of first that the war will end, and even more repressions may come because someone has to bear the blame for the losses in Ukraine. And of course, in Russia's system, Putin is not the one who is to be blamed. Someone else has to bear the blame. And secondly, without economic growth, the resources are not increasing, and the competition for this resources will keep growing among mid-level elite members.
So the ones that are dying have crossed Putin somehow, either with their Western connections or the way they're behaving in business. Is that right?
It would be I would say it's a long shot to say. There can be multiple reasons. Sometimes there's natural, because it's extremely stressful environment, so these people drink a lot and or maybe use drugs, and in the end they can just die because of natural reasons. But yes, people do suspect that there is somewhat of, theoretically speaking, is called extrajudicial assassinations and the use of state resources for eliminating your opponents. I think the last one, on the other side of the spectrum, there was one last case of the former regional official bordering Ukraine who was suspected of corruption and stealing state's money that were supposed to be delegated to this defense infrastructure, to prevent the Ukrainian breakthrough in Kursk region. And as we know, this infrastructure failed and it didn't help. And apparently that person had a meeting in the federal government, and then where he was told that he has to resign and there will be a criminal case against him. So he sat in his car, drove home, parked in the middle of the road, and shot himself. Probably this was actually his suicide because of the fear of what's going to happen not only to him but to his family. And in Russia, once the person dies, then the criminal case is closed. So in some way, you can protect your family and your family assets by, unfortunately, committing a suicide.
Wow, what a story. All right, let's talk a little bit about Putin's longevity. Can you even begin to paint a scenario? Now, of course, we just talked about the Prigozhin mutiny, but can you paint any sort of scenario where Putin is removed from office? I mean, this sounds crazy, but in a coup or another security services strongman comes along, is there any scenario that you could credit?
I would say, as before, first, I only believe in such a scenario when Russia's just general state power and resources would significantly diminish, that we would see a landslide of multiple problems in the regions, in the federal government, the inability, the collapse of the Russian state capacity to deliver public goods. Then that would naturally create a lot of elite dissatisfaction and potentially some of its members basically taking the reins of power in order to just achieve, to provide heating or gas to their residents, and that would undermine the Moscow's control of the federal government and the regional governments as well. In terms of the state security, well, my PhD is about Russia's civil-military relations, and one of the surprising developments globally when we compare Russia with other, for example, authoritarian states, is the effectiveness of this personalized control over absolutely every single branch that you can imagine in the Russian security sector. It was done gradually through 20 years of Putin's power, but he managed to centralize it and also instill this culture of, civilian supremacy. Basically, no matter who is in charge, officers are expected to obey the political decisions. Again, these decisions can be, authoritarian, completely undemocratic, but still, as commander-in-chief, these officers listen to their commander-in-chief. So I do not imagine sort of a military coup or the use of, say, the coup organized by other members of the security services. We discussed Prigozhin, but again, let's always keep in mind that he was absolutely like an alien body in the Russian security sector, outside any chain of command, sort of connected to Vladimir Putin personally. And he actually, even by his role, he also irritated some of the quote-unquote official, Russian officers who raised through the ranks in as like normal military or security service bureaucracy.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more of our discussion with Kirill Shamiev.
Beacon Global Strategies is the premier national security advisory firm. Beacon works side by side with leading companies to help them understand national security policy, geopolitical risk, global technology policy, and federal procurement trends. Beacon's insight gives business leaders the decision advantage. Founded in 2013, Beacon develops and supports the execution of bespoke strategies to mitigate business risk, drive growth, and navigate a complex geopolitical environment. With a bipartisan team and decades of experience, Beacon provides a global perspective to help clients tackle their toughest challenges.
Let's talk about Russia's Achilles heel. And I think President Trump's going right for it, is their oil production. It seems, of course, that the Ukrainians are having a lot of success with long-range precision strike to blow up refineries. And as much as 20% of the offtake has been blown up, if you will. It's off the market. And at the same time, without oil prices being high, it feels like the Russian economy has less activity. Can you talk a little bit about these issues and the criticality of oil to the longevity of Putin's regime?
I'm not an oil and gas expert, but the people I listen to and read their analysis, including Russian oil and gas analysts, they say that these strikes do bite the Russian economy, but still Russia has significant potential for resilience. I'd say quite a resilient economy and the state structure. So it has enough resources, at least in terms of sustaining the war, to redistribute from other sectors and to keep feeding the war machine, while of course it creates unpleasant cases, scenarios for the Russian public, just ordinary civilians who may have to stay in lines in some of the fuel stations in the regions. And cumulatively over long term, if these strikes continue, they will keep increasing the costs of the war for the country, and can become a political problem because if the problems keep accumulating, and again the military will be still supplied and enough oil for its tanks and all the equipment. But the civilian economy will keep suffering more. And again, going to my point about the state capacity to deliver public goods, this would be another significant block or stumbling block in Russia's ability to function as a state. And then, of course, it will have political implications for the Kremlin.
So if this continued, do you think Russia might pull back on the war?
Yeah, that's another $1 million question. Again, because currently in this system, only President Putin decides on what's going to happen in Ukraine. I think he'll have to face a significant trade-off, either to risk it all and keep the war and pushing the Ukrainians with significant costs, or maybe even escalating, potentially using nuclear cyber rattling again, as what was happening in 2022. Then Russia will keep pushing, but this will significantly increase political risks for his regime. On the other hand, I can see another development when, basically, I think the Kremlin actually has the resources to convince the Russian public that they achieve these goals in Ukraine. Say they got a land bridge to Crimea, or they can always construct a narrative that, look, the Ukrainians are denazified and they demilitarized whatever other points they had, especially if there would be a sort of informal, probably, agreement on no NATO membership to Ukraine. This, in my view, can potentially be sold as a victory, again, using these propaganda tools, enormous propaganda tools that the Kremlin has, and using the currently ongoing repression and purge of the Russian elites. Those who are dissatisfied with this outcome will be put in jail or disappear. This I can also see like it's a fork, another way in how things can develop in the country.
When we think about the Russian elite, do they view Trump as someone who's ultimately going to help Putin achieve some of his war aims, or has that been dashed? In other words, at first Trump seemed to be saying that Ukraine should give up some of the territories that the Russians have demanded. It feels like Trump's been talked out of that by the Europeans. So do they now see him as someone who is unlikely to achieve a favorable deal for Russia in the end?
I think it's neither, because these people don't actually know, the majority of them don't actually know what Trump is going to do. They have a sort of more practical issues to deal with their businesses or their units in the public administration, and they look at Trump as an external factor that increases uncertainty about their future. And I'm pretty sure a lot of them just hope that this war will end, and if Trump manages to satisfy some of the Russia's demands, it would be a positive development generally outside their, let's say, their own personal future. But again, I like to point back to the point I made at the beginning. These are the people who just think it's a mess created by the president, and because we cannot leave, we have no other options, we just have to adapt and achieve what we can no matter what. So I think when it comes to Trump, these people also think If people in the higher up somewhere agree with Trump, okay, we'll have to adopt, and that's why they actually try to strategize and think what they're going to do and what kind of repercussions the deal will bring for them personally.
How did they see the Biden administration, and do they see Trump as sort of more dangerous because he's, willing to go in any different direction depending on where he thinks he can make progress?
Yeah, this is an excellent question, and I have also thought about it. I would say Biden's administration, and actually the Europeans as well, they are predictable. They were predictable, and the Europeans are still predictable. They had an official policy of achieving, say, whatever, Russia's strategic defeat or like supporting Ukraine as long as it takes, meaning no defeat for Ukraine. And that helped the Kremlin to adapt to this policy. They expected further escalation, more arms supplies, deliveries, strikes against Russia. So it kind of it's a negative trend, but the Russian government could understand it and envisage potential policy choices that both Biden administration and the Europeans would take. With Trump, it's different. It's unstable. We do not know exactly what's going to happen, maybe even next week when he comes to the meeting, or what exactly he will say, and this creates a lot of uncertainty and stress in the system because it's highly centralized, and this system, when it's such an authoritarian centralized system, it's easier when decisions are being made on the top and then put down for implementation. And with this system, with President Trump, it puts this whole construct under stress, basically, because for the system, it's hard to anticipate what's going to happen next. And this creates, again, uncertainty and requires resources for anticipating and adapting to the potential developments. So this is two different approaches to Russia. And I think the current one is, analytically speaking, interesting. And I'm excited what kind of... well, maybe not excited, but what kind of... I'm curious about what policy outcomes it can bring.
So you're in Europe, you're at the European Council on Foreign Relations. What do you and other experts think about European commitments to increase defense spending? Does it feel like they're going to make good on it? Sometimes I see articles that, well, Germany's going to spend a lot of money on infrastructure and count that as military spending. Give us some sense. Are the Europeans finally seized of the need to truly spend up to 5% of their GDP on defense?
The short answer, strategically speaking, yes. I think the way how the bureaucracy is structured in the European Union, once the policy priorities are set, it takes a while to let the machinery go. But once it's up and running, it's going to be hard to stop. But the long answer is it's complicated because of completely lagging behind European military-industrial complex, divestment from the military-industrial infrastructure, reliance on the American not only military aid but also military production, and currently, as far as I know, the United States military-industrial complex is also busy with the Department of War's orders and the need to supply the American military. So this, and you also add bureaucratic challenges, and that is the European Union is 27 member states with different public administrations, military cultures. They need still somehow to make work together. So there are a lot of challenges, but the developments that are happening are quite encouraging in this regard. There is a lot of thoughts and resources put into this. And I personally believe that these developments may not affect this war significantly. The Russian-Ukrainian war, but it can potentially increase the European deterrence against anything that might come from Russia, no matter who's in charge there.
All right, as we begin to wrap up, let me press you on possible scenarios for the future. Let me throw out a couple. You're not limited to these, but, kind of tell us what you think's most likely. First, I consider the state of affairs to be more like a muddling through. The Russians were making incremental progress. Now it seems they're not making as much progress, but it just seems to go on and on and on. So that's, to me anyway, seems like the most likely outcome for the future. A second one might be a frozen conflict where the front lines, such as they are, I know it's fluid, but freeze and they stay there for some long period of time. And then 3, let's assume that a ceasefire occurs and the Russians and the Ukrainians at least reach some sort of agreement that ends the war for the short to medium term. Give us a sense of what you and the prevailing European expert opinion is on war-ending scenarios.
Well, in my view, this current grinding war, incremental Russia's progress will continue through the next year. Even when I had my trip back in May in Russia, no one expected any serious deal and end of immediate hostilities before 2026, just because of the balance of Russia's upper hand in the human and financial resources. But now these things change for Russia, so we can expect more serious discussions throughout the next year about how to end this war. But at the same time, considering Russian official position, and this is not only about Ukraine, even my interlocutor stated, actually it was interesting to listen to, they look at Ukraine as of course, goal as itself, achieving its non-NATO membership, for example, and occupying even more Ukrainian land, but at the same time as a tool to restructure the European security architecture, or how Putin frames it, the Eurasian security architecture, including in the sphere of arms control, for instance. So they think that a real lasting peace would only happen once Europeans, including in the United States, find a way to discuss conventional and nuclear arms control issues, and including in the political domain, to basically restore at least some bits and pieces of what was before. And we are so far away from this, but I think it's really important to think about and strategize what kind of Russia's position in Europe is realistic, and both the United States and Europe should achieve in order to be able to participate in these negotiations and hopefully one day find a way to achieve a lasting peace. But before that, I'm quite skeptical. I'm more inclined towards option 2, a sort of semi-frozen conflict, at least again until politicians and policymakers understand that we should find a new arrangement to what's happening in European security. The problem is what's going to happen with Russia and with the European politics, because a lot of things are changing now. I'm based in Germany, and there are some economic problems here. Our neighbors, France, are in a political crisis now, so things are really dynamic, and it's important to keep this in mind too.
Keep it in mind. All right, Kirill Shamiev, thank you so much for joining NatSec Matters.
Thank you for having me. Great conversation.
That was Kirill Shamiev. I'm Michael Allen. If you enjoy listening to NatSec Matters, please leave us a rating and review. We'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor, please email our team at bgs@bgsdc.com. You can also find this email in the show notes. Please join us next week for another episode of NatSec Matters.
NatSec Matters is produced by Steve Dorsey with assistance from Ashley Berry. NatSec Matters is a production of Beacon Global Strategies.